All right, I'm set to go. Neptune, in the higher side of its manifestation, resonates to the human spirit.
You have your recorder on?
Yes, I do. I can check to make sure. Yep, it's all going along just fine. Thank you for reminding me, though, because it's very often that I did remember to turn the recorder on, but I didn't zip up. It relates to the human spirit. And cosmographically speaking, the human spirit is in the region of abstract or ideational thought. This is also transcendent in the same way that life spirit is transcendent, which means it's beyond any kind of anything that is concrete. Everything that is concrete, that is chemical matter, vital life, energy, desire, or concrete thought, has abstract thought as an antecedent. Concrete thoughts are precipitates of ideas. But since all of these things come out of this one seed of ideation, ideas are not merely mental. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches there are ideas about form, there are ideas about life, there are ideas about emotions, and there are ideas about thoughts and even about other ideas. So, when you think idea, you don't think only a logical thought. You're thinking of something that is a conception that is big enough to cover almost anything. We are, as human beings right now, we are quarantined in our consciousness because of our waking consciousness is unfolded here in the chemical region of the dense physical world. And we do not have waking consciousness in the other higher planes or the other higher states of being. And we do have some conscious in between lives, consciousness there, but it is not the same thing. So, without clairvoyance to see through to the other worlds, when we hear something like world or state of being, we think of things as being like they are here. We think in terms of physical objects, and less physical air or space between them. If you take somebody who is a mystic and you say the word space, space is understood in a much different way. It's something very full. But if you take the average everyday person and you say space, you get ideas of science fiction movies or something like that, where there are these planets and they may have exotic conditions on them, but there's nothing in between them. So our conception of things here is illusory. We think only in terms of these physical objects. But it isn't like that in other worlds. Because if it were like that, those other worlds would be physical worlds. We can see into spiritual worlds. We can see into the desire world, for example. But when we do, we see in a different way. We don't see them as things, so that there is this interpenetration of everything. So we're missing the essential nature of the spiritual worlds if we perceive in them and only see objects that are separated from each other. It's transplanting an illusion from one state of consciousness to another. If we're looking in the desire world, everything in the desire world is made up of desire, is made up of emotions or feelings or things like that. And if we look at an elemental composed of desire stuff, one sees it in terms of three-dimensional proximity and sees it in terms of its outer shape. And that's not the important thing. The important thing is the emotional tone of that being. We miss the point, we miss the most important thing about it. In the region of abstract thought, the home of the human spirit, there are only ideas. There's nothing else but ideas. So our ability to be awake and aware in this realm depends on how well and how much we can ideate, how much we can conceive or receive and entertain ideas. If we have no ideational capacity, we have no consciousness. Now, the experience of space is within the concept of space. So the conception or the idea of space is boundless. But the manifestation but that idea can be anywhere, and we can conceive of space. So you can see this is a very difficult kind of thing we're trying to point out. One of the primary things of the region of abstract thought is mathematics. Mathematics comes from the deepest level of ideas. It's the germinal ideas of form, of any kind of form, that is vis-a-vis formlessness of life spirit. So we can conceive of different regions in mathematical ideas. And those different regions of mathematical ideas, some of them have very different kinds of properties. I recently read a book about the string theory and toruses and all sorts of things like that, and it was quite an amazing book. Because in ideas, mathematical ideas, you can produce some very strange concepts of forms and shapes and logically pinpoint every part of them. All right, but that's neither here nor there. So obviously, our conception of this world is, or the nature of this world is to our consciousness very, very complex. And that's what Neptune is all about. The Neptunian consciousness can make weird or uncanny associations that the concrete consciousness would never make, because it sees things in concrete terms, with terms of limitations. But there are no such limitations in the region of abstract thought, so connections can be made in very strange ways. You might say a cross-section of the world of ideas produces some very interesting figures. Concrete people do not trust Neptunian people. For example, most concrete people when they run into somebody like an analytical psychologist, somebody like Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud or somebody like that, and they start making interpretations of dreams or of myths or of symptomatic actions that a person has, a concrete person will think they're crazy. They're reading that into there. There is no such association. This is just make-believe. And you hear that from hard scientists. That's because they do not have the ideational capacity of understanding ideas of emotions or ideas of the train of consciousness as it becomes manifest from the unconscious. So they don't understand those things. The concrete people think that spiritual philosophies like this are demonic. They might see the effects of it. They might see a miracle healing, or they might see some kind of demonstration of occult power or something like that. And they think it's something evil. They think it is very demonic. Now the higher Neptunian, we're again looking at something that has a higher manifestation and a lower manifestation, just as Uranus did. The higher Neptunian is a magician, or is a composer. And a composer is somebody that pulls together all kinds of ideas and makes a composition of them. We're talking about a psychoanalyst, or we're talking about an occultist who uses spiritual power, for better or for worse. The Neptunian intuition is different from the Uranian intuition that we spoke of in the first two talks. The Neptunian intuition is such that one not only knows that something is true, but one also has a reason why it is true. But sometimes the reason is very odd or strange, like, where is this coming from, kind of an experience. With Neptunian intuition, the intuition takes part of that connectedness of all ideas. It has a proof of itself. It is not just self-evidence, it has some rationale. This means that sometimes in the lower manifestations of Neptune, the rationale can become something like a very fantastic kind of alibi or tall tale or something like that. Now, from what has just been said, you can get the false notion that the Neptunian intuition is superior to the Uranian intuition. It is not. The Uranian intuition is from a realm beyond even ideas. It comes from life truth, life spirit, where truth is a simple all truth, an ineffable truth. It can't even be put into reasons. Reasons are deposits of the truth, and they contain some of the truth, but they're a much more limited thing than the pure truth itself. Now, a full-blown experience of the life spirit is called an Uranian intuition that has been expanded. It is an enlightenment. In the West, we call it having a Christ consciousness experience. An expanded Neptunian experience in the human spirit is called by us a baptism of the Holy Spirit, which is a realization of all of the ideas, the centralmost idea being that of God and of self. and of self as God. There's a big difference between spirit and God. Spirit is the universal. It is, in a way, indefinable. Anything that is a definition of spirit is limited and cannot really be spirit, no matter how well it might be a container for some small expression of spirit. So there's a difference between that and God. God is an idea. It is a manifestation into something that we can understand with our abstract mind. It's the reality that counts and not the name. Now, the two different kinds of experience, the experience of life spirit and this experience of human spirit, have been around for centuries. For example, the experience of life spirit is called in India Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And the experience of human spirit is called Savikalpa Samadhi. Nirvi being from the same root as nirvana, and Savi from the same root as our word savvy comes from in the English language. And savvy has that knowledge about it. And the Nirvi has the quality of being very blissful, as we've been talking about Uranus as being blissful. The lower side of Neptune is as passive and feeble as the higher side is magically active and strong. With the lower side of Neptune, we find drug and alcohol stupors. We find trance mediums. We find a state of shock. And sometimes the passivity even is manifest as laziness. It's just nice to lie here and dream. Instead of doing the work that is necessary to know and then knowing, the lower side of Neptune will fake it. It dissembles in all sorts of ways. It is behind fraud and illusion and trickery and treachery and deception. I have a very strong Neptune conjoined the ascendant, and as a kid, I was a real faker. I had to carry in wood every day from the woodshed to the wood box, which stood just a couple of feet away from the wood-burning stove, and that had to be replenished every day. And I got to be a master at filling that wood box so that it looked full with the least amount of wood. It was a combination of laziness and fakery. It never dawned on me, as a lot of things didn't dawn on me until well on later into life. There's so much wood that has to be burned in order to do the cooking. And whether you fill up that wood box many times, making it look very full, or whether you fill it up once, putting as much as you can possibly get into it, it's still going to be the same amount of wood that's needed, and you're going to have to do it anyway, so you might just as well do it. Occultists or occultists like to investigate. There's something of a curiosity in the region of ideational thought, so that it isn't just conceiving and spinning out ideas. There is a needing to know that the conception, the immaculate conception of a self, inherent in that is a native kind of curiosity. It is a curiosity to know itself. And the higher states of spirit, life spirit and divine spirit, know themselves through reflection off of the self. And so there is a quality in that of seeking. I would use the word self-seeking, but you would have to use self-seeking with a capital S and not the small s, which would mean selfishness. But the lower side of Neptune, that seeking becomes spying and prying into other people's, not necessarily for any low ends, but just out of curiosity. Unfortunately, lower manifestations of Neptune are more common than the higher manifestations. And just the same ways it was with Uranus. When we looked at all the horoscopes for Uranus, we found many more that were responding to the lower side of it, and we didn't look at one single mystic, really deep mystic like Ramakrishna or somebody like that. I think I have that horoscope. We could have looked at that instead. All right. There are more psychics than there are trained clairvoyants. There are more mediums, which are now called channelers, than we have conscious out-of-the-body travelers. Now, the mystery schools have found that Neptune and Mercury are octaves of each other. The common quality which both of them share is reason or thought in some form. This is obvious in that both of them are from one part of the world of thought or the other. Mercury is from the region of concrete thought. Neptune is from the region of abstract thought. So we see Mercury ruling memory. But Neptune rules the memory of nature. The ability to see the records going back hundreds or thousands or even more years, depending on how deeply one is reading the memory of nature from. Mercury delineates thoughts. Neptune gives total superconscious comprehension. If you see a manifestation of Neptunian genius, it is surprising everything that it entails in it. It comprehends and it holds together so many different things in it. Even drug users spout rationalizations. Together, Mercury and Neptune, the two octaves, are called, in their manifestations, specialized manifestations in the world, they are called the Mercurial Mystery Schools. Because Mercury was the beginning of the mysteries, and the beginning of the mysteries came when the Mercurians visited here on earth, and when, so to speak, gods walked among men, and they developed the first initiates into the spiritual mysteries. And the Neptunian is for the occultist, just in the same way that we said Uranus was for the mystic, who does things primarily by feeling. With Mercury, we have somebody that has to know and that has to have power over nature and things like that. We're about ready to start looking at horoscopes in the way that we look at horoscopes, which is very dubious as far as astrology is concerned. In real astrology, looking at any of the things we've looked at, like any of the charts that we looked at, we put in 12 to 20 hours in a classroom. And that would even be condensed for all of the study that would have to go into those 12 or 15 or 18 hours of study per horoscope. So what we're doing is very light and it's very trivial. At the most, we look at one horoscope here, 5 or 6 minutes. If we're really looking with a long view, we look at 10 minutes. So we have to say that this has to be many times enlarged if we really want to understand something. All right, we're going to begin again with the conjunction. The conjunction is where the two octave planets are united as though they were one, in the hopes that the central quality that the two of them share will be apparent. We'll also look mostly at lower manifestations of Neptune, that is as a sensitive receiver rather than as an occultist. I was tempted to try to look up the horoscopes of a bunch of people who wielded magical powers, but I decided that wouldn't be as instructional as just looking at Neptunian people or Neptune-Mercury people and getting something out of that. All right. Alright, the first horoscope of a Neptune-Mercury conjoined is Ray Bradbury. Everybody knows who Ray Bradbury is. Yeah.
That one I know.
He is a famous science fiction writer who doesn't want to be known as a science fiction writer because he feels it's too limiting. Astrologically, this is a fascinating chart. Very fascinating because there are several really strong conjunctions in this. We have Mercury conjoined Neptune, which we're looking at, and that has a little over a degree of orb. But that's not the strongest one. There is Jupiter conjoined the Sun, which is very strong. And then there is Saturn conjoined Venus, which is even stronger. And the Saturn conjoined Venus as the strongest of those three conjunctions is the only one that forms outside aspects. It forms a weak sextile to Pluto, and it forms a strong square to the Moon. So what we're looking at here is something that a chunky style character. Chunky peanut butter is some of the things that are not ground up and it's not smoothly distributed. Now this type of character is sometimes hard to describe or understand because it tries to describe the entire universe by defining the entire universe relative to a few extremely well-developed areas that become generalized. Now this is a highly compensatory horoscope, and it's that way in part because of all of the planets in the 7th house. One compensates for other people and thinks in terms of them. The compensatory relationships are 7th house relationships. And first we have that Sun conjoined Jupiter, the two most positive and optimistic planets. And they're in probably the most positive of all signs, and one of the most expansive of all signs. So this is a really expansive person. Now for all of these compensatory relationships, he has had only one personal relationship. He has had one and only one wife. The 10th house is societal opportunities, and the 7th house is for opportunities with the public. And since there's all this in the 7th house, we can say that he's more publicly oriented than he is oriented to the acclaim of society. And this is borne out by the fact that he goes on book tours. He just quit recently, in recent years. Until he was age 90, he would go on book signing tours to interact with the public. On the other hand, he didn't put himself out into society as a celebrity, and he never did that. He probably never will. Now, the compensation is more than the seventh house, marriage and public support, but he also does this internally. The positivity is a compensation for the darkness, the fear, and negativity of Saturn conjoined Venus, and they're both square the moon. You might say that some of his fidelity with his wife is due to the fact that he has concerns about intimacy and is afraid that he might not have healthy interactions with women. Now, this is a darkly imaginative combination. The moon and Venus are both imaginative, and the Saturn part does the precipitation of it, but it gives its dark color. And so you can see that this is somebody who can imagine all kinds of horrible things that could take place. Now, it's sort of not quite a fantasy imagination, but on the other side of an overactive imagination is usually a phobia. This is a man that in his fear of going places in an automobile, he's never learned to drive an automobile in his entire life. And he is afraid of being in an automobile altogether. I suppose there are probably other phobias, but because it is the Saturn conjoined Venus is in the 8th house, we might not ever publicly learn of them because they'll never come out. It's possible that he's even afraid of women. It's possible that he is afraid of death, or he's afraid of being emotional. So we can see there are all kinds of potentials there, and they all can make sense, and perhaps quite a few of them do make sense relative to who he really is. So he's really strongly positive in that he doesn't want to put himself somewhere else. Like he feels that right where he is, this one point, this one conjunction, defines the whole universe. Why should he have to go anywhere else? So there are numerous ways that we could speculate on this character. We could speculate in that there's a perfect enantiodroma here, because in the same way that there is a lot of emotional negativity, there's a lot of compensatory, perhaps even overwhelming positivity. Now we want to get to the Neptune Mercury. We're saying that Mercury and Neptune brought together is when spiritual things and reason are brought together. Neptune and Mercury aspects, especially the conjunction, are aspects of somebody who tunes in. The mind is an instrument of tone or an instrument of pitch. Someone tunes in and then can just spout out all kinds of things from the spiritual world. Now, it's conceivable that the negativity and the darkness and the uncontrolled imagination or the fixated imagination is a receptivity that has gone overboard. He's become fascinated with ideas, and because he has a few fears, he goes overboard with them, and they become uncontrollable. In answer to those fears, the Mercury-Neptune tunes in on spiritual and other varieties of things, and he answers his own questions. He writes out what his fears are, or whatever he can imagine, he can write them out, and if he can write them out, he has power over them. It's a very interesting kind of consciousness that he has. In this, the mind and the divine consciousness are brought together for him, and he is a commentator. He comments on almost anything. He's a spiritual mouthpiece for the God within, I guess you could say it that way. The conjunction is such that spiritual intuition is inseparable from a state of mind, and that's the way his life is played out. He's mentally aware of it, at the same time he's sensitive to it.
Can I ask a quick question? The fact that those 4 planets in the 7th house are all intercepted in Leo, does that make a difference?
Yes. It means he can't quite do enough. No matter how positive he is, he can't quite do enough to satisfy what he thinks is his partner or the public or whatever. All right. Now let's turn to current news and approach this horoscope by asking a question: why would anyone marry Arnold Schwarzenegger? Especially since his political stance is diametric to her own. There's a lot of diametric things in this. This is the horoscope of the woman who is just about to terminate the Terminator. Yeah. It's Maria Schreiber. And this horoscope is even more other-oriented than the horoscope of Ray Bradbury. All of the planets are west of the prime vertical. 4 planets in Libra and the 7th house, and even a weak conjunction with Mars in Virgo. All of these are in the 7th house. What's unusual here is that the Sun makes no aspects. So there is a lacking of a strong sense of identity to herself. So she turns to her significant other to provide that strong sense of who she is or what she is, even strength itself. Pisces rising is a weak sign, and none of the planets in the 7th house could be considered strong, and both Libra and Virgo are often considered wimpy signs. You know, they're just too sweet and they're too serving and all of that they're not what you associate with strength. So, it's a character that calls for a strong man. However, it turns out that the strong man is really not so strong after all, and the first tip-off is those cigars he smokes. He has to show his manlyhood by smoking those cigars, because he was a health buff, and why would a health buff smoke cigars except that he felt insecure? Whatever strength that she found in Arnie didn't kick in her completely. And it's only when she gets rid of him and she has to be on her own that she is forced to be becoming strong. Because if a woman gives herself, they fell in love, I guess in one afternoon or something like that. It was at some kind of a political function. And when a woman gives herself completely to a man, there's nothing for him to win over anymore. So he develops that roving eye. Meanwhile, she's letting him be her strength instead of developing her own. And so her own self-strength is sort of in abeyance. And so she demands something that is more building. And this is why she is with this man. It's not clear how well she's doing at the building of strength, because the tabloid newspapers, where they have spies, they pay people to rat on other people. The day she signed the divorce papers, she went into a swoon and passed out, and so it's going to be tough go for her to be on her own. But as long as she had that strong male figure, she could go out and she could do all sorts of things and be successful in the world. Now, the Neptune-Mercury is strong, and it has a strong sextile with Pluto, who conjoins Jupiter. So all of these planets are in a double sextile trine with the moon. So this is quite a strong Mercury-Neptune combination. The Jupiter-Pluto represents power, meaning to say that she has a power behind her, and she herself can be a power for the good. This is altogether different than she being in herself a being that is powerful. She's part of the Kennedy clan, but she's not really politically active. She is a strong advocate for charitable organizations and service work with them, and that's where the Jupiter-Pluto in the 6th house comes in. But at the same time, she has won that very prestigious Peabody Award as a journalist and photojournalist. So we can see that she is indeed a very sensitive person. And she can bring things to the public eye with great skill. So she tunes in on things with the Neptune-Mercury, and she tunes in on them for the sake of others. She's a tool, but she's a somewhat conscious tool. And she doesn't have a strong sense of self. This is something that comes up. There's insecurities in a lot of the charts we're going to be looking at. And in this case, some would say, like Carl Jung would say, that in order to have this kind of sensitivity and receptivity, there cannot be too strong of a sense of self, because a strong sense of self blocks things like that from occurring. So it's almost like a sacrifice of self in order to have the Neptune-Mercury sensitivity and the ability to observe things and give them to other people as a reporter that she wouldn't have if she was just a strong personality. It's not clear that Arnie told her a bunch of lies. It's more likely that he just didn't say anything. But he surely did deceive her, and he certainly did hide things from her. So Saturn, Mercury, afflictions usually are the liars, but the Mercury-Neptune people aren't far behind in that skill. How is this all going to play out? She's most likely going to want to compromise, but if she chooses to not compromise, she's got all the power behind her, and she could very well win a lawsuit no matter what, because all of society would come down on her side. And so it's like the way this is playing out is a test of how her character is developing. Is she willing to stand up for herself and have backbone where she does not have it? Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy says that within and behind this chemical region of the physical worlds, we experience this with our senses. Behind it, there are other worlds that are causally antecedent. And if we follow the train of antecedents, we get a logical or a cosmological idea of the cosmos. Behind the chemical world is the etheric subdivision. which is the realm we call the etheric subdivision. It's where we have vital life and where there is energy. So this world is a precipitate of energy. There's complete agreement with that, with nebular theory, that there is a deposit from a higher state and the energies in interactions in a higher state that is more energetic. Within and behind the physical and etheric subdivisions, the whole physical world is a world composed of emotions, of feelings, of desires, of passions, a world of motive. So there is motivation behind energy and vitality. And within and behind that world of desires is the world of thought. So there is a thought that is behind motivation and behind action and behind everything that is in existence physically. That world of thought is in two major subdivisions, and it has 7 regions like every other one of the worlds. The two major subdivisions are, as we just saw earlier, the region of abstract thought and the region of concrete thought. The division is it's a watershed division, in that everything from the 4 regions of the concrete world of thought down to this physical world is concrete, is phenomenal, it has beginnings and ends. And everything beyond this subdivision is abstract, it's universal, it's noumenal, it's transcendental, or it's spiritual. It is the realm of divine beings. So the concrete subdivision of the world of thought abuts the transcendental world of spirit, so that everything that becomes manifest directly from the spirit, with the exception of Uranian intuition, comes through the region of concrete thought. And for this reason, Mercury, about whom we are speaking now in its relationship to Neptune, is called the servant and the messenger of the divine. Now, in the horoscopes that we've already looked at, Mercury conjoined Neptune, we see people who are messengers. The archetypal aspect is the Mercury conjoined Neptune, and they are messenger people. But messengers are more mercurial than they are Neptunian. So Mercury, especially since we're able to do something with our mind, usually is more important than the Neptune part of it all. So it's not a matter that Mercury was necessarily astrological stronger in its influence. It's a matter of something that is more accessible to us. Thinking is more accessible to us than direct spiritual experience. Now, sometimes even when Neptune is significantly stronger in an astrological sense, it still is the case that the phenomenal planet is stronger. And because of this, astrological judgment is very, very difficult. In order to judge things astrologically, you have to have intuition. The reason for this is because of our human evolution. We have not evolved far enough, and we are not as sensitive enough to respond to some of the more subtle qualities, the qualities of the octave planets. Eventually we will, and eventually they will be our first choice rather than the phenomenals, which will just be used to carry out what we're really experiencing in the spirit. So it's about time to look at one more Mercury-Neptune horoscope, another messenger, before we get too far carried away on this kind of exegesis. This is truly a spiritual messenger. And the data on this is rated very good. It is Martin Luther. Now, when we select these horoscopes, it's not an easy process, because there are not very many perfect and obvious and clear examples for demonstration. You can find a lot of horoscopes that have the Neptune conjoined Mercury, but they are so complexly involved with other things that it's hard to pull it out and see it for a beginning glance look at something to know that it is so. Now, I take a search engine and I have 50,000 horoscopes, and I keep looking up people until I find people that have the astrological characteristics I want, and then I have to go to biographies and YouTube and things like that, and then you think on them for a while. So these things that take place in 1 hour's time, it's amazing how fast they fly past relative to the process of preparing them. For instance, when looking at horoscopes of Uranus and Neptune, I came to an inordinate number of horoscopes where there were Saturn-Venus afflictions. They came up much more than one would expect statistically, including the one of Ray Bradbury, and the one that we're looking at right now has a Saturn conjoined Venus kind of insecurity, showing in Scorpio, showing some kind of a problem with sexuality. Again, this is another horoscope where the Sun is not very strong. The Sun is relatively unaspected. And again, we have another messenger. This is another one of those cases where Carl Jung would say, in order for one to be sensitive to inner things and bring them out, one must not have too strong of a sense of self. Are these meaningful coincidences? Yes, because we have to think that somebody's birth has a great purpose to it, especially somebody who influenced the changing of society as much as Martin Luther did. These are all interesting questions or kinds of things to look into. Is there some kind of a rebirth or psychological cycle that all of these people were born as messengers are reborn in rebirth because there's something at this time in the astrological makeup of the cosmos that makes it best for them? I don't know that. There's a lot of things like that are speculatively interesting, but we don't really always carry out the speculations. This is the horoscope of Martin Luther. Certainly a messenger of high spiritual things. Something that caused the great fracture in the Christian church, and opened the door to all kinds of developments in Christianity. He was not an egoist. There was plenty of pride. Leo was rising, and the Sun and Mars are both in Scorpio, and the Moon is in Aries, so there's plenty of opportunity for him to have pride, but he's not an egoist. In fact, he was very, very humble, just as you might expect. The high and the mighty you find up in the 10th house, and those who are below, who have a subjectivity or are subject to the powers of the world, you find down below in the 4th house. So he was an extremely subjective man, and he took a retiring life to work it out, at least for part of his life. He was a monk, and he was concerned with purging himself of his personal sins, which you would expect with the sun in Scorpio and all that kind of guilt thing that comes down with Scorpio. But he was also the messenger of higher power. Mercury conjoined Neptune, sextiles Pluto, and it trines the moon. Now this horoscope is unusual in that 3 planets are all but unaspected. They are Mars, they are Jupiter, they are the Sun. This is a horoscope that is not high in pride. Those were the things in the Bradbury chart that went the other way. So it's as though pride is set aside in order to solve personal problems. Or pride is set aside to be the spiritual messenger that he was. Now, this is all insightful, and it is all very nice, but it isn't what we want to get at. We want to get at the human spirit. We are saying that Neptune comes from the region of human spirit, but that region is co-ruled by 2 other planets. It is co-ruled with the Sun, which represents self, and the concept of self is focused in the region of ideational thought. The other co-ruler is Jupiter, and Jupiter is the planet that represents abstract thought. So we see here that this is a realm of spiritual ideals, but the idea of self is not an important part of it. Nor is the idea about ideas. That is not important either. What is important is the spiritual part. He's capable of abstract thought, but it's the spirit that counts. So we can see then that he is very, very idealistic. A humble person who has a strong Neptunian character is likely to be super idealistic. Neptune is one of the planets that is by far the high idealist. He did what he did not from dogma and not from being an anti or anything like that. He did what he did from idealism. Everything points to that moon up in the 9th house, which is extremely idealistic when we're talking about the Neptune Mercury conjunction being trine to the moon in the 9th house. So the octave planets are spontaneous and unpredictable. What happened was that when he carried out his work as a messenger, after the big surge, and then he was then defrocked or excommunicated, what happened is that he still continued on with that work and was recognized as a leader because he spoke for many, many people who were unhappy, especially highly educated people that were unhappy with the Catholic Church. But then his whole life changed. He had done his major messenger work, and he then worked on his own life. He got married, and he had 6 children. And he took in 6 children from his sister. And he took in children from other people. And he had this humongous home life that people would come to visit the great Martin Luther, and they'd run into a house full of kids, and they'd have to talk through all of that. It's quite a thing. So you can see that this is really a 4th house chart. All right, now we're ready to look at another chart, but before we look at it, we've got to do something else.
Well, is Neptune been in the 10th, would he have been proud?
He wouldn't have been proud, but he would have been much more out in the world, and his humility wouldn't have been given a chance to develop. All right, we're going to read some poetry, and I'm so tired I don't know whether I'll be able to read it out well. Sadie and Maud. Maud went to college. Sadie stayed home. Sadie scraped life with a fine-toothed comb. She didn't leave a tangle in. Her comb found every strand. Sadie was one of the livingest chicks in all the land. Sadie bore 2 babies under her maiden name. Maud and Ma and Papa nearly died of shame. When Sadie said her last so long, her girls struck out from home. Sadie left as heritage her fine-toothed comb. Maud, who went to college, is thin as a brown mouse. She is living all alone in this old house. These get a little bit more complicated, and I can't even, some of the clauses in thought are so long that I may not be able to hold them all together. My dreams, my works must wait till after hell. I hold my honey and I store my bread in little jars and cabinets of my will. I label clearly and each latch and lid I bid be firm till I return from hell. I am very hungry. I am incomplete, and none can give me any word but wait, the puny light. I keep my eyes pointed in, hoping that when the devil days of my hurt drag out to their last dregs, and I resume on such legs are left me, in such heart as I can manage, remember to go home, my taste will have turned insensitive to honey and bread, old purity could love. All right, and the last one is a real doozy to read. Garbage man, the man with the orderly mind. What do you think of us in fuzzy endeavor, you whose directions are sterling, whose lunge is straight? Can you make a reason? How can you pardon us who memorize the rules and never score, who memorize the rules from your own text but never quite transfer them to the game, who never quite receive the whistling ball, who gawk, begin to absorb the crowd's own roar? Is earnest enough? May earnest attract or lead to light? Is light enough? If hands in clumsy frenzy, flimsy, whimsically enlist, is light enough when this bewilderness, crying against the dark, shuts down the shades? Dilute confusion, find and explore our mist. This is from former poet laureate of the United States. All of her poetry is available on a website, and you can just sit there and click and read one after another.
Was it same?
What?
All 3 were by the same person?
Yes.
Who's that?
Gwendolyn Brooks.
Oh, I see. That's why you were.
Now, I did an analysis of these poems, which I can't carry out in the few minutes that we have. But when we look at these poems, we see that there are several things that are prominent. 7 different things. First of all, she uses very concrete things for very other world things. She's an idealist who thinks on religious and philosophical things. She is so unorthodox that she questions all the standard views of things. She expands views from specifics, but not vice versa. Her broad views are meant to be epitomes or moral standards. She obviously loves words. and she's obviously super complex. All of them describe a Neptune-Mercury kind of person. Her love of words is characteristic of Gemini and the ruler Mercury. Then there's the Sun and 3 other planets are all in Gemini. So you can see that this is a very wordy person in the positive sense of it all. Neptune is in Pluto, and together with all those Gemini planets, and Cancer, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. I meant Pluto. I'm sorry. Pluto is in Cancer with all those other planets in the 9th house. So we can see the reason why, even though she deals with very down-to-earth things, she's all the way up there in philosophy and religion and things like that. Mercury rules the cusp of the 9th house, and it's sextile to Neptune. So we're now looking at Mercury sextile Neptune, and this adds and augments the tendency toward idealism. This is a reflective idealism. She not only tunes in, but she expands and she reflects to it. And you can see that she's using simple objects to anchor her reflections or to give her something definite to reflect, to getting to these universal things. So we can again see that the sextile functions differently than the conjunction does. Now, if we put all this together with the fact that this is an inverted horoscope, meaning to say that instead of Aries rising, which would be the cosmic standard, Libra is rising. And this means then that she thinks concretely about abstract things and abstractly about concrete things. The abstractions are always going from concretion to abstraction, which describes the 9th house situation. And the fact that this aspect is a second Mercury aspect. Mercury's, if Mercury were in Libra, it would be a first aspect. So Mercury in this aspect is giving to Neptune. This is like saying that the reflection she's giving herself in reflection to something higher and beyond the normal state of consciousness. So it's really quite interesting to sit down with the works of an artist of one kind or another, and then to sit down with the horoscope and see how all artwork that is done is self-portrait works. So again, she's sort of a messenger, but she's a messenger that expatiates for her own, but she never leaves the transcendent state that's always doing that. That's always her objective. Now we get the hard horoscopes.
So far they've had everything all bunched in one little spot.
Yeah.
Is that part of
No, it's not.
the personality, or
No.
just happens that way?
It just happens that way.
Okay.
All right. Now, because octave planets transcend concrete worlds, they transcend the normal conception of time. And because they're so creative, all of the octave planets, the people who manifest them are outside of time. And this often means that they're far ahead of time. They give things to society. They give them cultural objects that are strange. And when it's Neptune, it is really strange. And this is the horoscope of such an individual. It is Bela Bartok, the famous Hungarian composer. He's one of those 20th century composers who wrote music that is almost unlistenable unless you develop a taste for it. And developing a taste for it, to fully appreciate it, involves an enormous amount of study. You have to know what he was doing with melody and harmony, because it's not immediately perceivable from the music itself. This is not simple recognition, this is complexity. This is taking something that is so otherworldly and that is something that is so chaotic and having some intellectual capacity to put it down in the way that the world can receive it at all, the little bit that it does, is what we're talking here about with Mercury sextile Neptune. There are very few people who are not deep students of music that can get what he is doing and that can get what he's saying. Now this is in... What?
Bella is a he?
Yes. Yeah. Like Bela Lugosi, who was also an Hungarian, the famous movie actor. Now, it's reflective also in the way he started with things. He started by going around and studying Eastern European folk dances. And then he started abstracting them. And abstracting them until he was in another world. So this, we can see the Neptune conjoins Venus, so he is associated with a very rare idea of beauty, but that idea of beauty becomes so abstracted, and that when it is brought into the physical world, it's almost unrecognizable. He did this with everything. He took musical forms and he took compositional theory and he put things together in such a way that there's almost nobody like him. He has 6 string quartets that are famous for their weirdness and for their abstractness. But if you listen to them for a long, long time, they do become beautiful. In this horoscope, he has the Sun and Jupiter and Saturn in Aries. But especially the Sun and Saturn, which are in conjunction, indicate a kind of cruelty, a hard kind of cruelty. Now, he wasn't being cruel to the world, but he had that view of life. And it's interesting how he portrays in some of his, like Bluebeard's Castle, and especially the Miraculous Mandarin, where he takes scenes of evil or things that are very bad things in society, and he can put them together with the chaotic music in such a way that he can portray the cruelty and the psychological impact that it has on our inner nature and on our soul in a way that's quite descriptive.
Did you say
to say nothing of jarring. What?
Did you say Sun was conjunct to Saturn?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Jupiter Saturn. I'm sorry. But the whole quality comes out. It's very Aries-like. He gets staccato. He gets forceful. Boom, boom, boom. All right. We're overstayed again by now. You can see that even by looking at the notes, I get excited about things, and then I get down to looking at the last ones, and I have very few notes for them. Catherine Graham, everybody know who Catherine Graham is? She was the owner and publisher of the Washington Post newspaper. Her husband died in early death, and she, well, it was early because he committed suicide, and she took it over. Newspapers are a Gemini world, so you can see that she's a Gemini person. She's definitely not a high spiritual person. She wasn't probing into chaos or either in the desire world or in the region of ideational thought. So she's a messenger of the material world more. The midheaven and those 3 planets are in Gemini, and Virgo is rising. So she's a natural for a word world. In this case, Mercury conjoins Mars. And they both sextile Neptune. Now, Mars-Neptune aspects are sometimes charisma, which she certainly had, and sometimes they are things like healing abilities, because there's a spiritualized energy or an energized spiritualities that can be imparted to others, but she was not a healer. But sometimes Mars-Neptune aspects deal with espionage, and it was under her that the investigative reporting of the Washington Post became a very big thing. Robert Woodward, for example, was one of the people that represents that whole business. So what she's doing is she is a person that is trying to answer to the intellectual needs of society, and she does that by being a sleuth, at least through other people, through associates. Neptune in the 11th house can be seen as associates. And so she is an investigative journalist. The 9th house is the house of publications, and we find Jupiter right at the beginning of it, and Jupiter sextiles Saturn, and it shows good judgment, and she's a natural to have been at that. All of the planets in Gemini shows that there's something shallow about it, but that newspapers are meant to be shallow. If things go too much into depth, you have something more like a philosophical paper than you have a newspaper. So we can see this is somebody that used the Mercury sextile Neptune in a very, very different way. She's a pretty responsible messenger because there's positivity in all the things that she does. She did renew. The Sun is in a first trine with Uranus, and she was a renewer of something that had not thrived as much as it had when it was under her husband. All right, that's as much as we have, so we'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Well, you got to the halfway point. What?
The middle of the afternoon.
Yeah.
Halfway for you.
Yeah, halfway for me. What's that?
What was the name of the paper that you took over?
The Washington Post. It's one of those newspapers that's right on the edge now, barely surviving.
Richard, was that the correct spelling of the Schreiber family name?
Oh, it could have been an error on my part.
Huh?
It could have been an error. But I said,
It had a C in it, and that was very Germanic, but I thought the Schreiber name was S-H-R-I.
oh,
Without the C in there, but I'm not positive.
I might have done an automatic in my mind. I do that sometimes. I'm a phonetic speller, which means I can't spell. What?
Is the first time given to you in the...
Yeah, in the database. And they tell you whether it's good quality data, whether it's speculative. There are about 5 or 6 different levels of the quality of data. I pretty much try to stay with the highest quality data, but sometimes it is it's too tempting to do something else.